everyone, welcome to Cinema Trip Reviews. I am Wyatt and Alex. Once again, joining me this week, we are going to be talking about the classic Thanksgiving movie, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, starring Steve Martin and John Candy. I know that you've really loved this movie, man. Like I'm a fan of it. It's one that it's I've watched here and there every couple years. So what makes you love this movie so much? Because you always like mention this movie
Yeah.
sometimes when we're having conversations.
This is nostalgia for me. This is a movie my mom put on every Thanksgiving. It was always on in the background. I probably saw it 40 times before I actually sat and like watched it.
It's one of
But like
those movies, yeah.
it's one of those that was just constantly on in the background. So now I can quote like this whole movie. Like I know
Yeah.
all this stuff.
Yeah, I was very similar. Like growing up, I'm like during around the holidays, even like during Christmas, but especially
Mhm.
Thanksgiving, TBS I think it was would always show this movie or like TNT or USA, those networks.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's the same with Christmas Story back in the day. I saw it by bits and pieces. So I'm
Yep.
sure I saw the movie a ton of times before I actually sat down and decided to watch it the whole way through. But this was probably one of those ones that I saw like I mentioned, I saw clips of it, but it's one of those ones I probably saw like down the line. Like I saw a lot more of Steve Martin and John Candy's other work before I really sat down and watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Nah, this is an early one for me. This has got to be though. This is the best Thanksgiving movie, right? Like I don't
It
know if
has
I
to
can think of
be.
another. Yeah, like there's not many other like choices. So
Yeah. I mean, unless you're going to like Thanksgiving.
No such thing as an evil turkey. Oh, wait. I lied.
Like I know you talk about that
and
one.
I do love that film, but it does not beat Plane, Trains, and Automobiles.
Yeah, but I mean, there's really not too many like huge Thanksgiving movies out there, so
Nah,
it has to be the top
just by
one.
just by default, you know. I mean,
Well, I feel
Charlie
like
Brown maybe.
yeah, maybe Charlie Brown, but I mean, even if you had some other ones, I feel like this one would probably take that top spot, though.
It's John Hughes. What I mean, we'll get to it. It's directed by John Hughes, written by John Hughes. Like
Yeah, and
King of the
he's
'80s,
yeah,
King of the
exactly.
'80s, dude.
16 Candles, Breakfast Club, Weird
Uncle
Science,
Buck.
Uncle Buck, Ferris
Yeah.
Bueller's Day Off, man.
Great Outdoors, another fantastic John Candy movie. Like
Yeah,
that guy hit homers. Like he didn't. I mean, I'm sure there are movies that were like meh for John Hughes, but usually that dude hit homers. Just like let's
yeah.
go.
Whether if he was directing it or just writing it or producing it, no
Yeah.
matter like what he was dealing with, it was a pretty big hit, or it's still
He
talked about today.
he does the National Lampoons too. I'm pretty sure the Christmas one and the vacation ones. He does Home
He
Alone.
might have produced them, but yeah,
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 he's attached to him.
yeah, he's attached to Home Alone.
Yeah,
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 exactly. So I mean, this was obviously a pretty big movie coming out. I mean, not only you have John Hughes, which is famous with all these other movies we already mentioned, but then you have Steve Martin and John
yeah.
Candy attached to it, two huge stars at the time. So I mean, everything put all together, that it's the makings of a great movie right there. And then you have the actual writing
Yeah.
behind it that makes it even stronger. So this movie, it came out in 1987. The budget for it was 15 million and it went on to make 49.5 million. So
All right.
it was pretty successful with the box office. It actually went up against The Running Man and Three Men and a Baby at the time.
I like the
Uh,
Running Man.
Running Man, of course, action movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. It wasn't one of my favorites of his, but
No,
it's a
no, but
decent movie though.
it's good. It's a pretty good
And
film.
Three Men and a Baby, it's okay. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I remember it.
I don't know if I've ever seen. I know what it is, but I don't know if I've ever seen it.
It's just some facts before we go in. A couple. Apparently, Steve Martin originally thought this movie was going to be way too long. Apparently, it was a 145-page script, and the first cut of the movie was around 4 hours long.
Yeah, I heard there's a huge cut of like a 3.5 hour cut
Yeah,
floating
so
somewhere.
and they ended up going through a couple different phases of cuts to trim it down to I think it ended up with like an hour 40 or hour 50. So they cut a decent chunk of this movie out that they filmed. And the other thing I have here is apparently John Hughes came up with the concept of this movie pretty much kind of basing it around his own real life experience. Apparently he had to go from New York to Chicago just like this movie, and it took him 5 days because he originally had to stay in a hotel because his plane got delayed, and then it just kept snowing and where he was supposed to go, and it just backed everything up. So it was just a hellhole. It was a hellscape for him for a couple days, and then apparently he sat down and wrote like the first draft in like 6 days or something like that. I don't know. It didn't take long for him.
That's because all comedy comes from torture, comes from tortured people. He's just like, oh, but he finds the humor
Oh,
in it.
6 hours. Sorry. He wrote it in 6 hours, not 6 days. This dude sat down and bumped this out in 6 hours. That's how much he hated that experience.
He gets home like for the hot Thanksgiving. He's like, I gotta write. I can't even hang out with
She's
you guys.
it's good seeing you. It's been so long. He's like, I got an idea in my head. I got to get
I-
it out. I'm sorry.
I gotta. Sorry.
Just disappears for 6 hours. I just had to get that out of my system. This has a decent amount of cameos in it too, and I love the cameos of like the 80s and 90s that you get because they don't really pay attention to them. Like they don't draw attention to the cameos other than they're just there. It's not like movies nowadays where like, oh, it's so and so, and like they have to have some witty line or something. But no, you get Kevin Bacon just out of nowhere at like close to the beginning of the movie, just for a very short minute. And then you get like Michael McKean and Annie McClurg, who is famous from like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She was like the receptionist there.
Yeah.
She's great in this movie though.
She is. That's one of the best scenes of the movie.
Oh yeah, for real. It's definitely one of the best scenes of the movie, and we're gonna get to that. So I guess we'll just kind of hop right into the movie. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is exactly what it sounds like. We already hinted at the basic story. Steve Martin is trying to get from New York to Chicago, just with the outrageous weather that's happening at that time. His flight gets delayed, and then he's stuck in New York, and I got to get home to Thanksgiving, so I'm going to find a way. And he just keeps on bumping into John Candy over and over and over. And
from the get-go.
From the get-go. And
steals his cab.
And it's not like he's a bad dude. This dude, he just has no sense of awareness, no sense of self-awareness.
Both of these people would drive me nuts. Both of them. Like in the beginning, I don't know if I like either of these. They grow on you. Don't get me wrong. But Steve Martin's such an asshole in the beginning.
Yeah.
And John Candy, you're right. Just like no awareness, no like he's got like Asperger's or something. Like he just doesn't know like the social norms that should be happening around him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you though.
Yeah, and Steve Martin, he's made to be the straight guy of the movie, and then John Candy, of course, is like the lovable goof of the like how the road trip movies are, and this has to be one of the most famous road trip movies out of them all, I would assume. I know there's a ton of them out there, but man, this has got to be up in like the top 5, I would assume, and that would be a good list to do sometime.
There you go.
He is in New York. He's stuck at a meeting where Steve Martin's stuck at a meeting where his boss just can't decide between like these 3 like magazine covers, and it seems like he's sitting there for hours just watching this dude. And the guy that he's talking to across the table, he's a TV dad from I forget what sitcom, but I recognize him immediately. I couldn't find his name. I was like, I know this dude from somewhere. I think he's the dad in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, if I'm not mistaken, but I think he was on like a TV show at some point. But he's stuck in that meeting, and the boss, he's just looking through those pictures trying to decide which one. And the dude, he has his ticket, he's got to go. And I like how they just highlight on the ticket like his time and everything. You don't see that much anymore.
I thought that was weird, and not like in a bad way, but in a way that I was like, did they add that? I don't remember. And I just didn't watch it enough. I was like, I don't remember them doing that.
Maybe like it wasn't there originally, and people were like, "What am I supposed to be looking at here on this ticket? It's too much information on the ticket." So like, all right, highlight the time.
That's what I thought for a second. I was like, what the fuck is that? But anyways.
But yeah, he races out, and I mean, he forgets his gloves. He races out, and like I mentioned, you meet Kevin Bacon. He's not even a real character in this movie, really. His only real purpose there is to get to the cab before Steve Martin does. And you get just like the wacky like 80s cliche music. It's like very synthy or like poppy for the 80s. It definitely dates the movie.
I actually like the soundtrack a lot.
It's okay at certain points. I mean, it really hits the 80s John Hughes cheese once you get into like the sad parts of the movie or like the more dramatic parts. You really get that like 80s like sappy music.
Yeah, the sappy music definitely hits you. But I even like, I know it's coming later and we'll bring it up again, but I like in this scene when he's chasing the cab, he says, "You're messing with the wrong guy." And then like later they bring that back up in the soundtrack where he's like, "You're messing with the wrong guy." And it's like in the pop funk. I like that.
But yeah, he's racing Kevin Bacon for that cab. It was a nice, cool little chase sequence. He's got all his bags and he's just like weaving in and out in between people and such. Almost gets hit by a couple cars, and as he like gets to the cab, he's like about to like load it up, but John Candy just swoops in there and steals it from him. And
Yeah, he
he's just,
pays like a stranger like $70 for it or something.
oh yeah, that dude's such an asshole. He's like, oh, if you pay 50, you sure like probably pay 75, right? And he's like, oh, you son of a bitch.
Not necessarily.
As soon as the cab takes off, you'd be like, give me my money back, asshole.
That's what he chases the cab. I'd have been way more worried about my money.
Just leaves the money. He's more worried about that cab and getting home. But like John Candy, like mentioned, no self-awareness. You're not even like, you don't even meet him yet. He just hops into the cab and they peace out. And he chases down that cab and he just tries to open a door, like, get out of the car. And that face that John Candy makes is hilarious, dude. He's like, oh. But yeah, he just takes off and he's just like, he just goes through it trying to get another cab and get back to the actual airport so he can get home. And he's like all dirty, his bags are all gross, and he gets there and he's already been through it. And this is just like the bottom of the mountain compared to what he's going to go through to the rest of the movie here. But he ends up running into John Candy at the airport, just sitting there waiting because his flight's being delayed. And then I like John Candy's book that he's reading throughout the movie. It's like Canadian Mount, and it's like a erotic book or something that he's reading. But I love this scene, and you get it a couple times throughout the movie. It's just like these wacky kind of like, I wouldn't say slapsticky, but very like Naked Gun type comedy stuff in the movie. It's where Steve Martin's trying to see if he actually knows this person. He recognizes him from somewhere. And then all of a sudden it like pops up and it's the same airport that he's in. They just put the taxi car door in front of him and he makes the same face. And it's hilarious. It's only for a brief second, but all they do is just put the car door in front of him and he makes the same face.
Yeah, they don't like cut back to the scene.
No.
It's like in the scene.
They just reenact it right there. He's like, you're the guy that stole my cab. He's like, I never stole nothing from nobody. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, wait a minute. You're the guy that tried to kick me out of my cab.
He's like, it was kind of easy to get a cab.
They get on the plane, and Steve Martin is supposed to be in first class. He makes a big deal about how he's supposed to be in first class. They bump him into coach because the flight was delayed and everything. And he just, you know, he has a Karen moment. He's like,
I don't know. I'd be kind of pissed if I was him, too. If you bought a first class ticket, I mean, I don't know if I'd have pushed it as much. He's pretty polite at this point still. He hasn't freaked out yet.
Yeah. But I think they even mention about like offering the difference in money, going towards another flight or something. But he's like, nope, I got first class. I want in first class.
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, I would have sat down, but I kind of would probably gave a little shit too. Like, dude, I that's what I bought, you know? Like,
And,
give me my first class.
Yep. And he has to go back to coach. And who, out of all the people, who does he have to sit next to? John Candy. And man, you haven't really got to see who this guy is until now. Now you're starting to see his real lack of self-awareness. He's like taking his shoes off on this plane. He even takes his sock off. He's rubbing my dog's barking. Yeah.
There's like a scene where he's like flipping his sock like this, and it's like going right near Steve Martin's face, and he's like, this is where I'm saying I do kind of feel for Steve Martin.
Oh, especially like once you get to the hotel.
Oh
too.
Yeah. But even this is awful. And like, not that I wouldn't be polite to the guy, but Steve Martin's like, hey, I just want to read the book. And he's like, oh, yeah. That's all I hate is a blabberjaw. If I keep talking, he just keeps going and going. Yeah, and going. And Steve Martin, this is Steve Martin's best, like, straight man, where you could just see it boiling in him. He's just like, oh my God.
Yeah. And he does a good job of just holding it beneath the surface until that hotel scene, whenever it finally comes out.
Yeah.
But yeah, even the old dude next to him, like as like they go to sleep, the old dude's like snoring and like gagging and like coughing next to him and everything. And then John Candy's like sleeping next to him, like snoring, like he's just stuck in between these two people. It's a terrible scene. I would hate that.
Yeah, I would hate that, dude.
Terrible. And then like John Candy even like wakes up and he's like, I forget what the exact quote. He's like, I don't think we're landing in Chicago or something.
Yeah, he's like, betcha something we don't land in Chicago or something like that.
And sure enough, they end up like going to like Kansas or something. Wichita, Kansas, yeah.
Wichita, Kansas. That's where they land.
You get a nice little cameo by Ben Stein at this point. I mean, he was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and then he also gets famous. He has his own TV show at one point, like When Ben Stein's Money, and then of course the like Clear Eyes commercials and shit.
Yeah. The Mask. Sorry.
Yeah, The Mask.
He's in The Mask.
I forgot about that. It's been a while since I've seen The Mask. But yeah, he's the airport announcer there. Candy, he even like makes fun of him because like as soon as they get off the plane, Steve Martin calls his wife saying, like, yeah, you know, I'm stuck in Kansas, whatever. I don't know when I'm going to be home. I'm going to try to find a way out of here. And Candy's like immediately calls up, gets a room in a hotel. He's like, I told you probably should have called around. Like, he's like, but hey, I got a place to stay if you want to lodge with me.
Yeah,
and like,
nice.
He's like, I don't know. I've dealt with this guy a little too long already. And then he sees that dude like sleeping in the airport on the ground. He's like, you know what? I'm all right. I'll go with you. That's cool. That sounds a lot better than this. They end up getting a ride with like one of the craziest, like weirdest taxis that you're going to see out there. It's like this souped up ride with like lights and
Doobie
and neons. Yeah, the dude's name's Doobie. Played by Larry Hankin, who's like a famous like character actor through TV and movies. I know he plays like the television version of Kramer and Seinfeld when they make like, the Seinfeld show within the show. He's in like Billy Madison. He's in a couple other famous movies as well.
Where'd they even get like find this cab? Like that's like, is it just a cab in Wichita, or should like Dell know him? It sounded like Dell knew him a little bit.
Maybe he's one of the people that maybe owed a favor to, or like owed him a favor.
Everybody
sold
owes
him
Dell a favor, yeah.
Because John Candy has, as you come to find out throughout this movie, he's like a shower curtain ring salesman, which is like, at the time of the 80s, was that really a thing? People went around just selling shower curtain rings.
Like,
But maybe like that cab was the only one that was available. Maybe everybody else already had the regular cabs booked up, but nobody was like, I don't want to deal with this guy. I don't want to deal with Doobie. They end up finding like this little like rundown like motel and everything. And a little important part, they kind of draw attention to it, but it comes up later. You forget about it for a little while, but they end up swapping credit cards during this scene because like.
The guy flips him, yeah.
Yeah, the guy flips him, and he ends up paying for the room and everything. Steve Martin ends up paying for the room. But yeah, then John Candy has Steve Martin's credit card and, vice versa. And man, this is where you get to how bad John Candy is in this hotel room, man. He really, doesn't waste any time making it a home. He like takes out the picture of his wife, puts it on the nightstand. He's popcorn all over the bed, cracker. Yeah.
Little peanuts and stuff.
He's smoking, sitting.
They have to share a bed too, by the way, for the listener. They have to share a bed, so it's one bed, and he's just like eating and smoking in it.
Yeah. And I love like when they first walk into that room, like Steve Martin walks in first and he sees that bed and he's like, oh God. Like he's like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then you just have that awkward like silence whenever they're just standing there looking at that one bed together. But yeah, he's making a mess out of the room. They decide like, oh, you can go ahead, take a shower first. It'll be all right. I'll get one after you. Dude uses all the towels. The floor's wet. Like all the towels are soaked. The only towel that's in there is like this little rinky washcloth. But like all the water goes, like like the water pressure goes out in the middle of washing his face and hair, and then it comes on and it's way too hot. He's just going.
Which none of that's John Candy's fault.
Yeah.
This guy's just getting bad luck at this point.
The worst bad luck out of anybody ever at this point over the course of a couple of days. Usually you have one bad day. Steve Martin had like a bad 5 days in a row. But yeah, he gets out, he's going to like brush his teeth, and like the sink's full of like his dirty socks and underwear is filled up with water. It's just so gross, dude.
Yeah, it is. It's the bathroom's disgusting. I would be pissed if I was Steve Martin at this point.
I would be so mad.
Yeah, like you guys are this is nasty. What are you doing in this bathroom?
Yeah, and then it's time to go to bed, and then you find out like he spilled beer all over the bed, and Steve Martin has to sleep in the wet spot. And then when he's trying to go to bed, this dude makes so much noise. He says he's trying to clear his sinuses out. He's like snorting and hacking. And, like, it's so gross, dude. What he's doing is so gross. And then he's like trying to read, going through like flipping through pages and stuff. Like this dude, like zero self-awareness, doesn't care. He's locked into his own little bubble.
His own little world. But this leads on to one of the best scenes in the movie, probably the most quotable scene in the movie. Well, yeah, probably, where Steve Martin gets up and freaks out
Oh yeah,
on
he
this guy.
roasts him.
Roasts him. I love that. He's like, you're like a chatty Cathy dog. So it's on your chest. You just keep pulling it and pulling it and pulling it.
Yeah, he roasts him for a couple minutes straight, man. But then like it's going back and forth because it's like I can tell you about stuff that I don't like about you. You're not so perfect. He's like, I gave you a place to stay. Like,
Like,
I helped you out in your time of need.
yeah, and he's like, oh yeah, I paid for it and stuff. And
Yeah, I paid for the room.
this is a good scene, and I love John Candy at the end where he's like, you can hurt me. He's like, that's fine. I'm an easy target. And he gets all like sentimental. This is when John Hughes' writing really comes out.
Yeah, and
you're just
usually
like,
you get these moments like towards the end of the movie, like in like the last like 3/4, and then like the rest of the way, they're like these people are buddies through the rest of the movie or whatever. But no, this happens very early. And then it kind of resets everything, and they're kind of back to square one. And then as it's going, it just kind of slowly starts building and building. And I mean, Steve Martin, he's going through some of his own shit that John Candy isn't involved with too at some points.
Yeah.
But man, it just kind of hits the reset button, and then it builds right back up. Man, Steve Martin, I feel for him this whole time.
You do feel for him, but he is a bit of a dick. So
he is a bit of a dick about it. And of course, like Steve Martin just feels terrible at that point. Like he let everything out of his chest. He's fine at that point. So he decides to go back to bed. And then you wake up, and this is one of the funniest parts of the movie, is like John Candy spooning him, and he's like kissing on his ear. And it's so hilarious. It's like he wakes up, and he's like, why are you kissing me? He's like, why are you holding my hand?
He's like, where's your other hand?
In between the two pillows.
Where's your other hand? Between two pillows. Those aren't pillows.
Those aren't pillows.
My favorite line of this whole thing is like, oh, how about them bears? Yeah, good seats about them bears.
But that's like easily like when you see like trailers or stuff about this movie, that's one of the scenes that's one of the biggest scenes from the movie that everybody remembers.
Yeah.
Those are pillows. And you would think like there's a dude's hand in between my ass cheeks right now.
I think it's his thighs. I always took
Is it his thighs? You think?
I always took it was in between, like he was holding his inner thigh.
Okay,
I feel like
I always
ass
thought
cheeks
like his
are
hand was in
pillows.
between his butt cheeks or something.
I just don't think Steve Martin's got that kind of ass that he could be like, those are pillows. I just have to imagine it's his inner thigh. Like he's got his hand up in his inner thigh.
Hey, you never know, man. Maybe Steve Martin was thick back in the day.
He got a clapper back
He's got
there.
a clapper. Those aren't pillows. But you're right. Thighs make more sense.
Yeah, but still.
And you know what? All these years, and that never even occurred to me. I always assumed it was his ass.
It's in his
I was like,
ass.
no, it couldn't have been his thighs.
Because Steve Martin's like curled like in a ball, so I just imagine his like hands like tucked in his inner thigh.
Oh my gosh. Oh, yeah,
I
go
did
ahead,
forget to mention right before that scene, it's gonna come up. They get robbed. A guy breaks into their
while they're sleeping
in their hotel room and robs them.
Yeah, he had like $700 in his wallet, which like, man, I don't know why you carry around $700 in your wallet.
Yeah, it's the 80s because they do talk about their credit cards later, and they don't
True.
really have credit cards. It's like weird cards.
Yeah, and you assume, at least I assumed originally, like when I first saw the movie, that this person that steals their money would come back into play at some point. But no, he's only there just to take their money, so they're just stuck with their credit cards at that point.
There is a deleted scene, and I only know this because I've read some trivia too on it, that John Candy orders pizza, and he tips the guy only like $1, and the guy's pissed off, and that's the guy who robs him.
Oh,
like he comes back
okay.
and he robs him.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's like a cut scene though. It's a deleted scene. You can see that one.
Okay, that's pretty neat. But yeah, they originally find out that because originally Steve Martin thinks that John Candy robbed him. He thinks that he took his money out of his wallet. Because like I mentioned, they kind of hit the reset button, and then next morning they go to breakfast at like this diner, and they're kind of buddy at this point. They're joking around until they get the check and have to pay the bill. Steve Martin thinks that John Candy stole his money. Then he finds out his wallet's empty too. So they find out that they got robbed. He's like, "Well, you think?"
You think?
So they're just kind of stuck here outside of this diner. And he's like, "Oh, don't worry. I got a buddy that owes me a favor. I'll put a call in." And it's his buddy Gus. And it's his son, Owen, that has to come and pick him up in his pickup truck. And Gus and Owen is played by Dylan Baker, who's always been like a creepy dude in some of these movies. He's more, I mean, to me, I recognize him mostly from like Trick or Treat. He's like the dad in Trick or Treat that with the son. He's like, don't forget the carve the eyes. Or
Yeah, I didn't know that was him. All right.
Yeah, but
I just watched Trick or Treat too.
Yeah, that's the dad in Trick or Treat. He's been in a ton of shit though.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's like this like redneck trucker that comes through in his pickup truck with like his dog and a bunch of hay in the back, and he's just so gross, dude. He's like hawking and spitting out, just chewing tobacco. And I didn't notice it until I read some factoids about this, but apparently John Hughes wasn't happy with the reactions that they were getting from the scene. So whenever he was introducing himself, and you could see it if you watch the scene back, I had to go and watch it again. Whenever he goes to shake Steve Martin's hand, after he shakes John Candy's, he spits a like chew out, but it doesn't completely come out, and it goes into his hand. And then he shakes Steve Martin's hand. And John Hughes told him to do that. He's like, he told him like spit right in your hand and shake Steve Martin's hand. And then you got genuine reaction from Steve Martin is real. He's just like disgusted, and he's sitting there just like looking at it. But like that is real. Like, and he in the scene you could see where he like, after he shakes his hand, he like goes to spit and it goes right into his hand.
Way to
so
play
gross,
the bit,
dude.
like if you're Steve Martin, like way not to be like, no, fuck you, like get away from me, you know. Like
apparently, as soon as the scene ended, he bolted to the bathroom, like wash his hand because he didn't know it was coming.
Yeah.
The dude is so fucking rude. He like gets his wife to come out. Don't worry, she'll get your bags for you.
She's like a newborn baby, like
that's
sitting
it.
there.
Yeah,
like
that's
it in her arms, and he's like, she might be small, but she's strong.
She's strong. He's like, no, it's all right. We got it. Don't worry about it.
We got it.
And they sit in the back of this truck, and they don't worry. It's only like 3 more hours or something until we get there. It's like what did he say? He's like 20 degrees or like 5 degrees or something.
He's like, how far is it? And he's like, 15 miles unless he takes the back roads, and then it could be 40 miles. And if we get traffic, we're thinking maybe 70.
And he, like I mentioned at the beginning of the movie, he forgets his gloves at his office, and you see like a pair of gloves sitting in that truck, and he goes and reaches for him, and that dog pops out, and it's just a mean ass like grizzled dog just staring him down in the back of that truck. So it just keeps adding up for these dudes at this point.
Oh, this whole movie it is literally just the simplest problem. Just boom, 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 you know, because next they get on the train. They do get to the train.
Yeah, and you think this is where they're going to part ways, because Steve Martin purposely buys tickets apart from each other so he doesn't have to sit with them.
Yeah.
But he even pays for the tickets, and he's like, well, what's your address? I could send you money or whatever. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. It's a gift. It's the holidays.
It's a gift.
It's a gift.
I like this scene, though, when Steve Martin's on the train. I feel like Dell's wearing off on him here because he starts talking to the girl on the train, and he's like kind of talking her ear off. And you're just like, oh, Dell's wearing off on you a little bit, man. You miss somebody to talk to at this point, you know?
Yeah. Got him accustomed to having someone there.
Yeah, like constantly to babber with, because he's like talking this girl's ear off, and she doesn't seem interested in it.
As most people would be, you know?
Yeah,
as most people
like,
aren't.
leave me alone.
But of course, as everything that's come before this, another case of bad luck happens. The train breaks down, and everybody's just got to get off board. And they said, "Oh, there's going to be a bus like a couple miles out. Just walk across the highway there, and you'll be fine. They'll pick you up." So they have to like go through this rocky, muddy field, and like you feel bad for John Candy because like Steve Martin's like, I don't want to go over there, but he sees him sitting there like dragging that big ass trunk around by himself through like that bumpy, muddy field, and he's like, all right, I guess. Because John Candy even stops and like looks around, like looks for him a little bit, and he's like, fuck, all right.
He saw me.
He saw me. But then it's right back at it. They get on the bus, and he has them singing show tunes and the Flintstones. He's singing the Flintstones theme song on there.
Yeah. I like this one too because Steve Martin tries to sing like a no, I've never even heard this song, and like nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah, everybody just stares at him.
Yeah, like, what do you want?
Okay. And that's when like they bust into another song. John Candy just he's a man of the people. He's
man of the people.
Yeah.
People like John Candy.
People like John Candy.
I would like John Candy.
I would
feel
too,
like,
man. He
I
seems
feel like
like
I'd
a cool
go
guy.
get a beer. Yeah, I'd go get a beer with John Candy. I feel like he'd be an awesome guy to hang out with.
Absolutely. But he just seems very personable and just such a likable guy.
Yeah.
Until you get to know him in the movie, until you actually get to sit down and be with him for a day or two.
Yeah, Dell, I don't know if I'd have a beer with. John Candy,
John
I'd
Candy,
have a beer with.
definitely.
This bus takes them to St. Louis, right? I think this is as far as they get to St. Louis.
Yes, and they have to get some money. So John Candy does what he does best, and that's hustling shower curtains. Shower curtain rings just to get some cash, and he ends up getting like $200 to $300 worth of cash, I guess, just by hustling, selling them as earrings, selling them as like bracelets, selling them as like actual
schmoozing people.
Yeah, just working the magic, working his salesman charm at the bus station, I guess.
Yeah.
So they actually get some cash, so they can keep going on their little trek to Chicago. And at this point, they decide to part ways at a diner. And it's kind of a sad scene because you can tell that John Candy doesn't want to,
he's a little hurt.
He's a little hurt because he's like, I'm just holding you back at this point. Like, he's trying to give him every excuse in the book to leave. And even John Candy tries to give him some cash. He's like, hey, man, you were part of this too. And he's like, no, I can't do that. I'm sorry. He's like, you pay for the meal or whatever.
Yeah. And then they fight a little bit here. This is, again, where Steve Martin's kind of an asshole. I'm like, dude, come on. Like, chill.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to be such a dick to this guy, just go to the bathroom and leave. Like, why you got to say it to his face,
That would be a huge dick move if he just left.
Still, though, like, I don't know. I don't want to hurt his feelings in front of me.
You had that sad scene where he roasts him before. But here you kind of get like how his character is. Like, maybe there's something deeper than what's actually here. Like, maybe he is a lonely guy, you can tell, especially from this scene. Like, maybe there's something that he's not telling. There's something he's not telling Steve Martin through the course of this movie. And as of, you do find out later down the line.
Yeah, this is the scene. This is the one where he's like, I haven't been home in years. And he's like, oh, just, hypothetically, like, I'm always on the road.
Yeah, he's just always traveling around selling shit, selling the shower curtain rings.
Yeah.
But, man, this is where Steve Martin, man, just can't catch a break, even getting away from Dell. He goes and he tries to get a rental car. And he gets to bus all the way out to like this far out lot where all these rental cars are, and there's no car there. it's stolen at that point. So he has to walk all the way back to like this airport. He has to walk across this field, across this highway. Who knows how far, man.
There's no way. 3 miles, by the way. I don't know why I know that. It's 3 miles he's got to walk.
That's especially
a long walk
through the
on a
weather
highway.
and through the highway and everything.
How do they not have a lot attendant? How do they not have like a phone to call?
A dude on a radio or something?
Yeah, something.
Especially if you go to somewhere like that now, every single lot would have somebody there, like making sure everybody's good.
Exactly. Or like a phone station, like with even if it's just a direct line straight to like the airport, like to the, because like what happens when you would drop the car off, like you need somebody to pick you up.
And I love that, like when he gets there and he sees that it's there and he just like throws everything on the ground. He's like jumping. He's like, son of a bitch. Just can't catch a break. And then you get probably one of the best, if not the best scene of the movie, in my opinion, is that scene with Eddie McClurg, who was from Ferris Bueller. She was the receptionist and she's like the customer service lady at the counter of the rental car center. And man, picked the wrong day because Steve Martin comes in just covered in dirt, has like his tie around his head. and he drops like 18 F-bombs in the matter of like a minute, bro. And this is like a Steve Martin you never seen before, really. You don't really see Steve Martin like this. You've seen him pissed in some movies, but not dropping F-bombs.
Yeah. This is the only scene. This is the only scene of why it's rated R, and I guess John Hughes and them really pushed for this. They were like, we want this scene.
Yeah, apparently this was one of the scenes that like sold Steve Martin on the movie.
Yeah.
Like he's like, yes, absolutely.
I want to swear this lady out.
He's like, I want a fucking car. He's like, I want it. Right. He like even goes like by the make and the model. He's like, I don't care.
I want a fucking Camry, a fucking Buick, a fucking sedan, 4 wheels, and a fucking steering wheel.
Start by wiping that fucking dumbass smile off your rosy fucking cheeks.
I don't appreciate your fucking tone. Your car, your fucking company leaving me out in a fucking lot with no fucking car.
She's like, "Do you have your receipt?" "No, I ripped it up."
And she's like, "You're
Oh,
fucked."
then you're fucked.
Apparently, from what I saw, a lot of her lines were improvised. Like
Yeah.
John Hughes just told her, like
Wing it.
especially like when he walks up and she's like chatting on the phone with her
Gobble,
girl. Like
gobble.
that was all like improvised and everything. He just let her go. But yeah, man, I love that rant that he goes on.
Fucking automobile. A fucking Datsun, a fucking Toyota, a fucking Mustang, a fucking Buick. 4 fucking wheels and a seat.
It's classic.
It's a classic
But
one.
she's just such a nice, like, bubbly lady too.
I could see though, like I've been in those situations where you're pissy and they're like fuck you. Like I wouldn't
Yeah,
just
he's
treat her
like,
like
wipe
that.
fucking smirk off your fucking face.
How can I help you? You can start by wiping that fucking smirk off your fucking face. But she instantly is like,
I don't appreciate your tone. I don't appreciate being left out in the middle of a fucking lot with no fucking car. He's just what every person wants to do from time to time. You just have one of those days where in your head you can just imagine cussing somebody out, but you know you can't. In real life, you just can't get away with that shit sometimes.
yeah.
Or else nowadays you filmed and put on YouTube and made fun of by
That's
the world.
right. As you should be. Don't
As you
treat
should
people
be.
like that.
Exactly. Exactly. And he even like whenever he gets kicked out of the like rental or like airport or wherever he's at, he gets in a fight with like the attendant that's there,
Yeah.
and the dude
This
like throws
big
him in
dude.
front of the car.
Which happens to be because of Steve Martin's luck.
John Candy.
Yeah.
And then the dude grabs him by the nuts and pulls him out of the middle of the road.
He's like, "I'll move the car, but you help my friend up." And Steve Martin's like, "No.
No. He's like, "I'll help him up." Like, who would do that? Who just grabs a dude by his nuts? Just grab him by the leg.
No, I like this next scene because obviously because Dell has the best heart. John Candy's character, he lets Steve Martin come with him.
Yeah.
In his rental car, and Steve Martin's talking in a high pitched voice.
Do you have any idea how glad I am I didn't kill you?
Do you have any idea how glad I'd be if you had?
Yeah.
He's like, ah. I can't do it because my voice don't go like that. You can definitely tell he just sucked helium and fucking did these lines.
And this is like one of the other scenes that sold Steve Martin on the movie apparently was whenever he's driving the car. That scene where it's just John Candy fucking with the seat the whole time. And he's like, "You're gonna break it," and he's like, "I gotta get it right. I have a sore back, and I only have to sit in certain positions."
It moves like side to side sometimes too. Like,
and then he
I'm
goes like way back, and then he goes like up, and he's like, "Oh, okay, that's just right." And then he starts like doing it again. And then it cuts. He's like, "I can't believe it. You fucking broke the seat."
It's Steve Martin on it. And then it like puts him all the way into
his
the
face is
fucking...
up against the glass.
Is it great? This is comfortable.
Great. This is fucking comfortable. And even when like the lack of self-awareness, because he even tries to go to sleep, and then just John Candy is having the time of his life, just blaring like music, just playing piano on the dashboard. just doesn't care at all. Steve Martin's just trying to sleep.
Sleeping there. Like, I understand having to put music on because he's probably tired too, but he is blaring this music.
Oh yeah, and he's smoking too in the car,
yeah.
so it's smoky as shit probably. And there's a scene that's going to come back in a little bit. He flicks the cigarette out the window and just comes right back into the back seat.
Yeah.
And this is probably one of my other favorite parts of the movie here.
The car ride is my personal, like, I'll tell you my favorite scene, but this is definitely like my second favorite scene of the entire, like the whole ride, start to finish. This whole fucking car ride is my favorite.
Because John Candy, he gets too hot and he's trying to take his jacket off. And he gets his one arm looped and stuck, so he can't pull it out. And then while he's trying to get out, he gets his other arm stuck. So his arms are just tied back behind his back pretty much. And this car's just swerving and jerking all across the road. Somehow Steve Martin didn't wake up during this whole thing. And then he finally gets it free, and he just goes sliding and spins out the whole car.
Yeah, he smashes the brakes because they go off the exit.
Yeah, and Steve Martin's like, "Huh? What's going on?"
He wakes up and he's like, "Everything okay?
Everything all right?"
Like, yeah, dear.
As he's getting back onto the highway, he gets on the wrong side. He's going down the wrong side. And this is my favorite. It's Steve Martin is just in that, like, just waking up, like, haze. And he sees that car on the opposite end of the road, just yelling at them. And he's like, what? What did they say?
You're going the wrong way.
Like, they say you're going the wrong way. He's like, they're drunk. How the hell do they know where I'm going?
How do they know where we're going? He's like, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. How do they know where we're going? And then he's like, no, we're good. Don't worry about it. We're fine.
And
like,
two semi-trucks the whole time are barreling towards.
He's like, huh?
You're going the wrong direction.
He's like,
two semi-trucks perfectly right beside each other, barreling down towards them.
And dude, that when they're sliding, the sparks are flying. It cuts to them as skeletons sitting there, and then the best part is he looks over and John Candy's the devil sitting there laughing at him. Dude, it's the best part of the movie. Like, between like that interaction, he's like, how do they know where we're going?
Oh, it continues for me because it slides. He puts the brakes on. They survive, and then Steve Martin's fingers are in the dashboard because he's still like, and like the steering wheel is bent forward from John Candy pushing on the steering wheel. And when they brake, like, everything flies off the top of the car, all
the trunk and everything. Yeah.
So they get out. Steve Martin's pissed, obviously, super pissed. He yells at John Candy. He's like, what the fuck are you doing? They slide the trunk back on, and then this is when it comes out.
The cigarette that he threw earlier that's in the back seat lights the car on fire.
Oh no, not yet.
Oh.
I don't think this is yet. This is where it comes out that he used Steve Martin's credit card.
It's because of that, because he tells him, like, how did you rent a car? He's like, how did you even rent a car without putting a credit card down? He's like, I sold him some, like, shower rings. I gave him a good discount or whatever.
And he's like, no, you're not. And because they're sitting there, and he's like, no, you didn't, Dal. You have to use a credit card, He's like, you didn't rent that. And this is my favorite scene. He's like, why? And he's like shaking him back and forth. And he's like, I thought you were being nice. He's like, why would I leave my card in your thing? And he shakes him. And he's like, I thought you were being nice. And he shakes him. He's like, why would I put my card in your wallet or something like that? I thought you were just being nice. I thought you were being. And he like pulls it back forward.
But I love, like, when the car's on fire, like, Steve Martin just starts laughing, and he's like, "You did it to yourself." He's like,
"You finally did it to yourself."
You finally did it to yourself.
Yeah, you're right. That's what he tells him.
You've been tormenting me this whole time, and finally you have some form of comeuppance, like, to yourself. It finally backfired on you. And then, of course, the car is under his name. So it's like, what the fuck?
This is when it comes out with the credit card. And he just fucking whops him in the belly. Fucking punches it, which is long overdue at this point.
Oh,
long overdue. John Candy deserved that.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it just escalates and escalates, man. That whole section of the movie is hilarious, dude.
I even like when they get to the hotel in this burnt down jalopy. They get in this car, it's burnt down, steaming.
Yeah, it's got smoke coming off of it and everything.
His hands are all stuck to she's like,
they're all bundled up. And they try to get a room, and of course, like, John Candy doesn't have anything at that point. It all got, like, pretty much burnt up. Like, he doesn't have any money or his cards. Steve Martin's he like trades, like, he gives him like $18 in his watch to have a room
nice
for the
watch.
night. And the attendant, like, the dude that's, like, running the hotel there, I don't know his name, but he's the dude that plays the lawyer Gennaro in Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
But I was like, holy shit, I've never seen him in anything else, I don't think, other than Jurassic Park. So it's pretty funny.
We'll get to it, but I feel bad for this guy also.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that. But Steve Martin gets his room, and there's even 2 beds in it, and he's like, finally, some peace and fucking quiet. Yeah, fuck you. I'm going to bed. And then he just has, like, this intuition because, like, John Candy couldn't get a room, and he just decides to sit in that car with no roof. It's all burnt to shit, and he's just sitting there while it's snowing.
Another touching moment. He's like talking to his wife. He's like not on the phone. He's just like talking like to the air to his wife, and like, it's another touching moment.
Yeah, as much as this dude has just been causing mayhem and just causing nothing but, terrible things for Steve Martin, you feel bad for him during a couple points of this movie, you feel so bad for just because he's so lovable and he just doesn't have a self-awareness.
Yeah,
But he
like-
means well by everything.
Yeah, he does mean well. He just, he's just awful.
he's not an awful human being. He just, I don't know.
Sometimes.
He means well. He tries to be a good person.
Steve Martin, though,
yeah, he
against
feels
his better
bad
judgment.
for him.
Yeah, he benches better judgment. He lets him in the hotel room.
Yeah, and then you get a nice scene. You get a great scene of them actually bonding, and this is the scene that I mentioned where you normally get this at this point in the movie, like 3/4 of the way through like these road trip or like those movies where you have like one straight dude and then of course the goofy like troublemaker. They always have that scene where they come together and bond, and then they're cool for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And this is pretty much that scene, but
it's late. Yeah, we don't have too much more of the movie left. This is a late scene in the movie.
And I just love it. They're sitting around just drinking those little hotel, little booze bottles and everything, just talking and everything. But it's a great scene. And they're just laughing and carrying on. They're like two peas in a pod at that point. I mean, the next day, they're even in the burn-ass car. They're cruising around singing with each other.
Well, this is where I feel bad for the hotel clerk.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to give him a room because they don't have a credit card. They give him cash and a Rolex, and he's like, I don't own the place. I shouldn't give this to you.
Yeah.
But he ends up giving it to him. Well, for whatever. They back the car because they're trying to rock it out of the snow into the hotel room.
Just keep pushing it. Just push it.
Break the wall down right through the window. They back this car and they just get in the car and peel off.
Like
that dude,
go.
For sure lost his job.
Oh, for sure.
Just trying to be nice.
He said, gave me a Rolex.
But yeah, Wyatt's right there. Driving down the road, they're singing. They're better now.
Yeah, and then they get pulled over by the cop. And the cop is actually, he's a famous actor too. Michael McKean. He's been in a bunch of stuff. He's like famous for like This Is Spinal Tap.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in Curb Your Enthusiasm in a couple episodes.
He usually plays like the sleazy guy. Usually.
Yeah.
Like that's his kind of role.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But he's a cop in this one. He pulls him over. He's like, you know how fast you're going? He's like, well, my speedometer's kind of melted. I don't know how fast I'm going. You were going like a 75 or 78. That makes sense.
It's like, you're the expert.
What's going on here? He's like, well, we had a little bit of a fire last night, but she still runs good. And then he mentions all the things that are wrong with it. And he's like, but the radio works, which is funny enough. He's like, I gotta impound this. You can't drive this any farther. This breaks all of our rules, all of our laws. You can't drive this.
John
This is a
Candy
safety hazard.
In this scene, did you notice John Candy gave Steve Martin one glove too? He gives him one glove. John Candy, he gives him one glove. He's got one of John Candy's gloves on.
I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
See, that's how good of a guy he is.
He's a nice guy. Give him one glove.
But yeah, the car gets impounded, so now they're on their own once again. They get a ride on like this dairy truck, and they're just
in the back,
cold as hell, just in this freezing truck. He's like, "Oh, it's like 3 more hours, and we'll be there. Don't worry about it."
But they're getting there. They're going to Chicago at this point. Like it's happening.
Yes, and they actually get to Chicago. And I don't know how they're paying for this train because they get on the train platform. But they don't have any money, so I don't know how he gets on that train. But yeah, this is where they're officially going to part ways at this point, and they say their goodbyes. Steve Martin hops on that train, and it's kind of a cool, like, neat scene where he's just sitting there thinking about his family and everything, and then like all the memories of John Candy start slipping in,
and he's laughing,
and then it like pops into like the one where he's cuddling him and kissing his ear, and he starts laughing.
I read another thing on this that whole reaction of Steve Martin is again natural.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't ready for the scene. They were just kind of like he was getting ready for the scene, and then they're like, no, fuck it, we're keeping that. Like you just getting ready for this.
Yeah, he was just kind of reading over his lines, and they just liked the just the candidness of the shot and everything. But during that scene, he starts remembering certain pieces of what John Candy was saying throughout the course of the whole trip, like what you mentioned with him feels like he's been gone from home for years now. And
the looks that he gives him. There's a part where he's like, to the wives, and John Candy just kind of looks down. He's like, to the wives,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, Steve Martin knows there's something that he wasn't telling him, and it's such a heartwarming, heartbreaking scene. It kind of puts some comedy in there too, because the train comes backwards. Like the train takes off from the station, and then as soon as like Steve Martin realizes it, you see the train just coming backwards into the station,
Yeah.
like you forgot something, and then he just hops off, and then of course you get like the heartbreaking scene, and like John Candy's like wife passed 8 years ago at that
And he's
point.
like, what are you still doing here, Dell? And
Yeah, because he's just sitting there at the train station, doesn't know
Yeah.
what to do, and
He doesn't know where to go
What are you
next."
doing, man? And then he just feels so bad. He's like, "Come on, I'm taking you home. I'm taking you to meet my family, and you're having Thanksgiving with us."
Yeah.
And
And
you
this
have
is
to, it's a great
You
scene
got
of them walking down that road holding the
trunk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do love this is the first time that Dell gets any kind of semblance of like not like personal boundaries, because he's like, I'm just gonna come in and then leave, like I'll just be there for a few minutes. And Steve Martin's like, Dell, you're fine, stay,
Yeah.
like as they're walking up the stairs, like that's not Dell to say that. So I like that he's growing,
Yeah, I mean, I feel it gives you the feeling that that's really the first person that he's opened up to.
Yeah.
To is Steve Martin. So I feel like he's in that vulnerable state too. So he's just like, don't worry, I don't want to be too much of a hassle. And he's like, don't worry about it, man. Like, you're in my home. You're welcome here. And he goes in and sees his wife, sees his kids, and you get that, it ends on John Candy's smiling face, just like Uncle Buck. It's like the same exact shot as Uncle Buck.
Same exact shot. That is my favorite scene, by the way. And I'm not too man to admit this. I cry every time at that end. I cry. I tear up every time. Just like how happy John Candy is to just see Steve Martin with his family. I love when she's like, Mr. Griffith, Mrs. Page. I don't know. I love all of it. And I'm always like, weep.
But yeah, that's the end of the movie. It's a great movie. I feel like just to be a nitpick, I feel like they probably should have introduced him telling Steve Martin that a little earlier, because it happens like right at the very end. And I think they should have lessened the time that it happened. Like 8 years, I feel like it should have been like maybe a year, or maybe, because I feel like 8 years, man, like it's going to sound bad, but man, after 8 years, you should be over it at this point. Like,
yeah, but I think he's such a hard person to get along with, because he says that a little bit in the car, where he's like talking to her. At that point, it's her dead body, like her ghost, her angel, whatever. And he's like, "You were right, Marie. Everybody I push away. Like I pushed everybody away. Like I pushed you away. I pushed everybody."
He feels alone. Yeah.
Yeah, he feels like I don't think he's an easy person, and like we've said, he's not an easy person to get along with. So I just feel like he's trapped there.
Yeah, I just feel like maybe if they would have made it like a year or two, it would have made more of an impact. Where it's like, dude, this guy's been sitting on this for 8 years. Holy shit.
I got a little
overall,
I got nitpicks in this movie. It's a great movie. I got nitpicks too. I think it takes a little long to get going. Not that the beginning's not funny, but the beginning's more like chuckle worthy. I don't think until they get into the hotel the first time with like the underwear scene and the thing, I think that's where the movie really starts picking up. So I think it takes just a smidge too long to get going, and you don't like the characters, a lot of them, until the end. Like they go back and forth too much for me.
Yeah, because it's been a while since I rewatched it. Even rewatching it, you're like, you love John Candy, but man, even through like half the movie, you're like, this dude is too much. Like
too much.
I'm getting annoyed watching Steve Martin, like him going through all this. Exactly. I can't imagine how he would be in real life going through all this shit.
Exactly.
But it's such a great movie, man. It's definitely one of Steve Martin's best and one of John Candy's best. And I think from what I read, this is probably, from what Steve Martin and John Candy said at the time, this is one of their favorite movies that they've done. So I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's a heartwarming film, a heartbreaking film as well, but it's got a lot of laughs and it's got a lot of heart too.
Yeah, it's a movie it'll run the gambit of emotions for you,
Oh yeah, it takes you through everything.
That last scene really does, and it kind of gets you into the holiday spirit. I love to getting everybody together, like even the people that absolutely irritate you, it's the holidays, they love you. That's his point. He loves him, Dell loves Neal in this movie. I know they just met each other, but that's the kind of guy he is. The minute he met him, he's like, we're best friends,
In this movie, it really, especially like holding on that last frame, like you get in Uncle Buck, and in this movie with John Candy, it really makes you appreciate the greatness that was John Candy.
Oh man,
through that small time that we had.
John Candy is awesome, and I love almost every film he's in.
Yeah.
Almost every film. I think the dude again hit homers. Great Outdoors is one of my favorite films. I love Uncle Buck. I know you mentioned Uncle Buck. Uncle
Yeah.
Buck might be my favorite John Candy film.
Yeah, Uncle Buck's fantastic.
I
He's
like
just a fantastic actor. And all the stories you read about, like they say, the real person, John Candy, is just,
That's
he's
good,
just
yeah.
like the characters you see in the movies. He's such a lovable guy.
I even like some of his bad movies, like Who's Harry Crumb. Like I know that's considered one of his bad
I don't
movies.
think I've seen that one.
I mean, I grew up with it again. I just kind of liked it because I grew up with it.
Yeah.
So watch Who's Harry Crumb one time. It's a good movie.
Yeah,
Well, I like
and
it.
if you haven't, you'll have to check out. He was on like Canada had their own like Canadian version of like what you would consider like Saturday Night Live or
yeah.
Mad TV, like a sketch comedy show, and that's where he got his start. And it was like him and Rick Moranis and a bunch of other guys from that around that time period
I will have to
on
watch
like a sketch comedy show, and it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But this is such a great movie. Of course, I mean, any movie really with John Hughes attached, it's up there. It's a
It's
top
up there.
movie. I mean, it's brilliantly written. I don't know how I would have felt about like a 3 or 4 hour version of it. I don't know if I would have been able to deal with Dell's hijinks for 4 hours.
Wow,
3
yeah.
hours. I feel like there would have been a lot more heartbreaking scenes in those 3 or 4 hours too. Like some heavy stuff more
Yeah.
so than what we got in this movie already. But it was very well paced. So I mean, like the 2 hours they trimmed off the movie, they cut it at the right places. It seemed because it was very well paced. But yeah, it was a fantastic movie, man. I definitely think people, if you haven't seen it,
You need to.
need to see it. And I would say it's out of a buy it, rent it, or miss it, you should buy it.
It's also a buy for me. It's a classic movie, and me and Wyatt can't do it justice with a summary. A lot of this humor, a lot of the charm of this movie is the dialogue that's written for these characters. It's the interaction on how they talk to each other. Like
Yeah.
So you actually have to see the scene. You have to see that how it's written, how they talk to each other. There's a reason this movie's so fucking quotable. People quote this movie. It's because it's so well written.
Yeah, and it's one of those movies that after you watch it and you really appreciate it after all these years, you realize that I don't know if you could have did this movie with anybody else. I feel
Yeah.
like Steve Martin and John Candy perfectly fit those roles to a T. Like that, it seemed like those roles were specifically written for these two guys.
Yeah. I'm with you, man. I'm gonna buy it 100%, own it. I was telling Wyatt before we got on here, I own it twice. I have this movie 2 times, so own it.
Yeah, and we're obviously big fans of Steve Martin and John Candy. I'm sure we're going to be talking about some more of their movies at some point in the future. So
Now I want to.
Yeah, now I'm going to want to. But I'm sure we'll hit on those. But of course, I mean, this great movie, can't recommend it enough. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. Go out and watch it right now. I mean, you already know the basic gist of the movie if you watch this video this far.
This season.
But we're not spoiling anything because, like you mentioned, it doesn't give it justice. You actually
Doesn't
have
give
to
it.
see it.
Yep.
Anything else you want to add here, man?
I gotta say, Wyatt, I've been on the show a lot. I want a shirt, man. Where can I get a shirt?
I'm gonna have to get you a shirt. I don't
Yeah,
have them. I don't have available to the public yet. But
I'm
do
jealous
got
of the
a
shirt.
Sweet Cinema Trip reviews. But
Yeah.
you deserve one as much as you're on the show, man. I need to get you a
need-
shirt.
Yeah, I'd like one.
I'm gonna have to get you one. And then possibly eventually, of course, I'll make them available to everybody else. But that'll be a little while down the line here.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, man,
I
thanks for
really
being on.
appreciate it. Give me my shirt. I know you're gonna. The next question.
I'll give you
you're gonna
mine
ask
right
me-
now. I'll take it off and give it to you.
Take it on my. Thanks, Dell. I knew you would. Nice guy. Nice guy, Dell over there. I know the next question's asking where people can find me. Of course, find me on Tap That. It's usually back here, but I had to do the plane, trains, and automobiles thing. And I'm always here. I love doing these, so keep finding me here too. I have a great time.
Yeah, man, I appreciate having you on here, and I'm sure you're going to be on going forward a bunch of times. So
I love doing it.
I don't even really got to introduce you on these episodes anymore. People should know who you are.
Yeah, I'm starting to be like a co-host at this point.
Yeah,
man.
exactly. Part-time co-host. But yeah, as always, everybody, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Make sure to go follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Cinema Trip Reviews and Cinema Trip Views. Also, go check us out wherever you get your podcasts. We're available pretty much everywhere. Drop in and leave us a good review there. Next week on the show, I'm pretty sure Decision Reel will be on the episode where you're going to be talking about Die Hard. Since we are starting out December, we're talking about Christmas movies, and this is a yearly debate with everybody on the internet. We're going to be talking about Die Hard with the Decision Reel podcast. They're going to be guesting on the show. So stay tuned next week.
All
And
right.
we'll see everybody later.